Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly kind of uncomfortable paradox. Think about it for a second. We are living in the wealthiest, freest, and most technologically advanced civilization in all of human history. Yet, if you look at our major institutions, our universities, the media, major publishing houses, a lot of our educated elites seem to absolutely despise it. They constantly frame Western civilization as uniquely oppressive, racist, sexist, the whole shebang. So what is going on here? Why does the most successful society on Earth have a culture that produces so much self-contempt? Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive right into our agenda based on the source material. First up, the paradox of success. Second, defining oikophobia. Third, history's cycle of decline. Fourth, oikophobia in the modern West. And finally, we'll wrap up with the future of our civilization. Starting with Section 1, the paradox of success. Wealth, freedom, and self-contempt. It's literally wild to look at modern Western institutions and see how frequently they frame their own civilization as uniquely terrible, despite, the unprecedented prosperity we all enjoy. Which really forces us to ask, why do the most successful societies often end up despising themselves? Is this current cultural mood just a temporary psychological sickness? Or is it a repeating historical pattern? Well, according to the source material we're examining today, this has all happened before. Which brings us to Section 2, defining oikophobia, the fear of the familiar. To really grasp this repeating pattern, we have to introduce the core concept from Benedict Beckeld's totally eye-opening book, Western Self-Contempt. And the whole theory hinges on a word you might not have heard before, oikophobia. It comes from the Greek oikos, meaning home or household, and phobia, which we all know means fear or aversion. So you can think of it as the exact opposite of xenophobia. While a xenophobe fears the foreign, the oikophobe rejects what's right in their own backyard. And to be clear, we're not just talking about healthy criticism of your own culture. Every society needs that, right? Instead, it's this reflexive, almost automatic belief that your own culture is uniquely awful, while foreign cultures are romantically idealized. So how does this actually happen? Beckeld outlines a specific civilizational cycle. Step 1. A society starts off with strong tribal cohesion, religious unity, and, real vitality. Step 2, they achieve success and security, which creates massive wealth and establishes a permanent leisure class. Then Step 3, this new wealth gives the elites the intellectual freedom to completely detach from practical struggles. They no longer have to fight to defend the society that sustains them, so their critical energies turn inward into this deep introspection. And finally, Step 4, that inward criticism breeds cultural and moral relativism, internal fragmentation, and ultimately, the decay of the civilization's power. It's ironic, really. The downfall follows directly from the success. Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. History's cycle of decline, repeating the pattern. When looking across thousands of years of history, the source material identifies a remarkably consistent pattern. This oikophobia emerges right after civilization hits its peak era. We see it clearly in classical Greece with democratic fragmentation, in the late Roman Republic with massive factionalism, in Enlightenment France with elite mockery, and again in post-World War II Britain. Let's zoom in on these fascinating historical parallels. Take ancient Greece, for example. As the civilization grew richer, elites on the outskirts started mixing with foreign cultures. They got incredibly wealthy, but faced intense criticism from rural interior Greeks who saw them as becoming, effete. Look at this quote from the philosopher Xenophanes. He mocks his contemporaries, saying they were learning useless luxury from the Lydians and strutting with their pretty hair and drenched in pungent with sophisticated oils. It really shows how this dynamic of wealthy, worldly elites clashing with rugged, rural citizens is practically a tale as old as time. Fast forward a bit into Greece's golden age, and you get figures like Diogenes the Cynic. Honestly, Diogenes was essentially the prototype for the modern oikophobe. He famously despised his own countrymen, enthusiastically adopted foreign customs just to rebel against Greek culture, and proudly called himself a cosmopolitan, a citizen of the world. And by the end of this era, Greek society had completely fragmented into squabbling little interest groups, leaving them completely wide open to being conquered by the Macedonians. Now, Rome followed a very similar trajectory, though they did manage to delay the decline. In the late Republic, elites started embracing what critics like Cato called effeminate Greek culture. But Rome bought itself a few extra centuries of cohesion by transitioning into an empire. That concentrated power and basically acted like a massive reset button. However, that underlying oikophobia, it just kept simmering. Eventually, elites like Seneca started dismissing patriotism as simple-mindedness, traditional Roman religion totally decayed, and you saw a huge rise in exotic Eastern cults and multiculturalism. Jumping way forward to early modern Europe, 18th century France gives us a textbook example. You had thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau romanticizing exotic, primitive societies while painting European society as completely artificial and oppressive. Meanwhile, Voltaire is relentlessly mocking French traditions and religion, favoring Eastern ways instead. This kind of elite detachment totally paved the way for the French Revolution. And what followed was a literary obsession with victimhood, which you see in authors like Stendhal, and just endless internal rebellions, where different factions cared more about hurting each other than strengthening the nation. Britain, on the flip side, managed to hold off full-blown Oikophobia a lot longer than France did. Why? Well, they had constant external threats from the Scots and the Irish that kept them unified. They fused the church and state, and they hammered out major political compromises like the 1689 Bill of Rights. Plus, and this is absolutely key, managing a massive global empire meant their young upper-class men actually retained military training. That kept them grounded in practical realities much, much longer than the French elites. And this brilliantly illustrates what finally broke that British cohesion, the sheer horror and immense cost of the world wars. By 1945, George Orwell observed that within the intelligentsia, a derisive and mildly hostile attitude towards Britain was basically compulsory. He pointed out how intellectuals would instinctively side against their own nation. So the immense trauma of the world wars, combined with losing their empire, basically unleashed full-blown oikophobia among the British elite. Tracing this on a timeline, it's wild to see the progression. Oikophobia spreads from the 18th century French Enlightenment, hits late 19th century British disillusionment, explodes post-1945 in Britain, and then finally crosses the Atlantic to the US in the 1950s. That was with the Beat generation, writers like Jack Kerouac who completely rejected American norms and dove headfirst into Eastern mysticism. It's like an exact echo of the behavior we saw in ancient Greek and Roman elites. Which brings us to Section 4. Oikophobia in the Modern West, the American and Western experience. So the United States hit its peak power right after World War II, and true to the historical cycle, almost immediately started showing symptoms of civilizational self-contempt. The source material impartially maps modern phenomena directly onto this historical cycle. We're seeing a sharp decline in traditional religion, we're seeing our elites constantly signal their cosmopolitan superiority, and we're seeing American history framed not as a story of unprecedented liberty and innovation, but primarily as a catalog of oppression, like with the 1619 Project or the whole movement to tear down historical statues. There's also this massive fetishization of formerly marginalized groups in our media. According to Beckeld's theory, this is the exact same behavioral pattern we saw in declining Greece and Enlightenment France. Now, what's really fascinating is how this theory views modern political rhetoric. Take this infamous quote from Barack Obama talking about small-town Americans clinging to guns or religion. The explainer impartially compares this statement directly to the snarkiness of Voltaire or the sneers of Diogenes. It frames this not just as a standard political gaffe, but as a classic textbook example of elite virtue signaling. It's a way for those in power to broadcast how cosmopolitan and vastly superior they are to the common, everyday citizen. To understand why this is happening everywhere today, the source points to Patrick Deneen theory on identities. Deneen argues that modern liberalism weakens what he calls thick identities. These are our deep, foundational attachments to our people, traditions, religion, and local culture. In their place, it swaps in thin identities. Things based on universal, abstract ideals like progress and diversity. But here's the catch. When you're liberated from those thick ties, you become totally rootless. And when you're rootless, it becomes psychologically super easy, even virtuous, to look at your own specific culture and view it as backward or oppressive. Throw into the mix Christopher Lasch's concept of the culture of narcissism. Modern Westerners are raised with, let's face it, wildly exaggerated self-esteem. This highly narcissistic view of the self makes us falsely believe that if we live back in the day, we would have acted with absolute moral purity. It basically allows us to claim this totally unearned moral superiority over historical figures. Plus, the immense trauma of World War II and Nazism deeply stigmatized almost any form of healthy nationalism. So you put all that together, and it creates the perfect, tragic storm for cultural narcissism and self-contempt to just thrive unchecked. And that leads us to our final section, Section 5, the future of our civilization. Is the cycle inevitable? So, the big question. If history is just this recurring loop, are democratic societies simply doomed to self-destruct? Well, the crucial point is this deeply tragic irony that Beckeld points out. Think about it. A civilization in its early stages actually needs a progressive outlook to adopt new ideas, absorb outsider strength, and actually grow. But a civilization in its late stages, it desperately needs a conservative outlook so it doesn't completely lose the ability to stand up for itself and maintain cultural cohesion. The perennial doom of Western societies is that they get the exact opposite. Early on, people tend to be highly conservative. Then later on, once they have immense wealth and security, the elites become highly progressive. They get exactly what they don't need at exactly the wrong time. But actually, scratch that. It's not completely hopeless. The theory is deeply nuanced. It doesn't say we have to throw out democracy. As the author notes, a society can absolutely appreciate the freedom of women or the economic perks of immigration, while still soberly recognizing that a culture desperately needs cohesion to survive. In fact, thinkers like R.R. Reno in his book Return of the Strong Gods suggest that the recent rise of right-wing populist movements across the West is actually a direct organic reaction to this oikophobia. It's essentially a desperate attempt by the populace to bring back those thick ties, religion, tradition, nationhood, that actually hold a society together. Which leaves us with a really profound question to end on. Are we hopelessly locked into this historical loop of self-destruction? Or can a modern, democratic society actually strike a balance between open-minded progress and the absolutely crucial preservation of its own cultural foundation? If this explainer sparked your curiosity and you want to see how this dynamic might play out in the extreme, the source highly recommends checking out a novel called The Camp of the Saints. It is a seriously fascinating topic that really forces us to take a hard look in the mirror. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the world around you.